November 13th, 1977. A night like any other. At least that's how it began. Officer Linda Carter started her shift just after sunset. She was a young patrol officer in her mid-20s, barely 2 years into the job, and eager to prove herself in a department where female officers were still a rarity. The small town she patrolled wasn't known for much crime. Petty theft, the occasional drunk driver, a few disturbances here and there. It wasn't the sort of place where a cop simply disappeared. But by the time dawn broke the next day, Linda was gone. Her patrol car sat on the side of a lonely road, headlights still burning through the early morning fog. The engine was running. The driver's door was left slightly ajar. On the passenger seat, her police hat. But Linda herself had vanished. For hours, fellow officers searched nearby fields and backroads, calling her name into the darkness. Neighbors woke up to the unsettling news. A police officer had gone missing during her shift, without a single trace. The town wasn't just shocked, they were terrified. Because if someone could make an officer of the law disappear, then no one was safe. What followed was 13 years of questions, rumors, broken leads, and grief that never faded. Until finally, a hiker stumbled upon a chilling discovery in the woods. A shallow grave that revealed what had really happened that night. This is the story of Officer Linda Carter, the young woman who vanished on patrol, and the decades-long fight for justice that followed. Before the headlines, before the mystery, Linda Carter was simply Linda. Born in 1951, she grew up in a modest neighborhood, the eldest of 3 children. Friends and family described her as ambitious, fiercely independent, and with a stubborn streak that meant once she set her mind on something, there was no turning back. In the 1970s, becoming a police officer as a woman was far from common. Many police departments still resisted female recruits, and those who made it through the academy faced skepticism, harassment, and constant pressure to prove themselves. Linda knew this, but she wanted to serve her community, and she had the drive to succeed. Her instructors remembered her as determined. She wasn't the strongest cadet in the class, but she was one of the sharpest, methodical, quick-thinking, and able to stay calm under pressure. Traits that would later haunt investigators, because if anyone could handle themselves in a dangerous situation, it was Linda. By 1977, she had built a reputation as reliable. She was the officer who would volunteer for extra shifts, the one who double-checked her reports, the one who didn't mind working the late-night patrols most others dreaded. But being a police officer in a small town also meant visibility. Everyone knew who Linda was. She was seen at local diners, walking her beat on Main Street, waving to kids on bicycles. And that visibility, some believe, made her a target. On the night she disappeared, Linda wasn't chasing down a suspect or responding to a violent crime. She was doing what she always did, patrolling her assigned route, alone, in the dark hours when most people were asleep. And yet, somewhere on that quiet route, something went terribly, fatally wrong. November 12, 1977. Linda began her shift at 7 p.m. She signed in at the station, chatted briefly with her supervisor, and picked up her cruiser keys. At around 8:15 p.m., she made a routine traffic stop, a minor violation. The driver later told investigators that Linda had been polite, professional, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Between 9 and 11 p.m., her patrol log showed regular checks, a pass by the local factory, a drive through the downtown strip, a radio call near a gas station. Everything is normal. At 12:30 a.m., Linda radioed in to dispatch. Her voice was calm. She reported, "Everything looks quiet." Those 4 words would later echo through countless retellings of her case. But at 2:17 a.m., something changed. When backup officers went to check her route, they found her cruiser parked along a desolate road near the edge of town. The headlights were still on. The engine was idling. The driver's door was slightly open. Inside the car, her hat was on the seat. Her flashlight was missing, and Linda was nowhere to be found. There were no skid marks on the road, no broken glass, no blood, no signs of a struggle. It was as if she had simply stepped out of the vehicle and vanished into the night. For a police officer to disappear in the middle of duty was unheard of. Within hours, the town transformed into a crime scene. Roadblocks were set up. Officers swept fields with flashlights. Helicopters circled overhead. Volunteers joined the search. But the hours turned into days. The days into weeks. And every lead seemed to end in the same place. Nowhere. What had happened to Officer Linda Carter? Had she been ambushed? Had she willingly left her car? Or was something far stranger at play? The discovery of Linda's empty patrol car set off one of the largest searches the small town had ever seen. By 3 a.m., dozens of officers were combing through the woods, calling her name. Flashlights flickered through the darkness. Search dogs picked up faint trails but lost them within yards. Helicopters hovered overhead, shining beams across empty fields. The first 48 hours in a missing persons case are the most critical. Everyone knew that. But despite the urgency, there was nothing. No footprints in the mud. No tire tracks leading away. No blood or broken weapon. Local residents joined the effort. Farmers scoured their land. Neighbors opened barns and sheds. Children whispered her name at school, half believing she would walk through the doors again. But the days stretched into weeks. November turned into December. Snow began to fall, erasing whatever faint traces might have remained. Every day, Linda's family called the station. Every night, officers went home exhausted, wondering if they had failed one of their own. For the people of the town, fear took hold. If a trained, armed police officer could be taken, who was safe? When investigators had no evidence, they turned to theories. And over the years, those theories grew darker, more tangled, more desperate. Some believed Linda had run away. They pointed to her age, just 26, and whispered about the pressures of police work. But her family pushed back fiercely. Linda loved her job. She had plans, goals, a community she wouldn't abandon. Others suspected romance. Rumors spread that Linda was secretly seeing someone. Perhaps another officer, perhaps a man with a dangerous past. Could jealousy or betrayal have played a role? No proof was ever found. Then came the darker possibilities. Linda had made arrests in the months before her disappearance. Drug users, small-time criminals, a few violent men with grudges against the law. Investigators considered that someone she had once handcuffed had decided to strike back. But without witnesses, without evidence, everything was speculation. The most chilling theory came from fellow officers. Some wondered if Linda had been set up, lured by a false emergency call. If that were true, then her abductor had knowledge of police routines. They may have even been someone she trusted. Over time, the case file filled with dead ends. Anonymous tips, false confessions. A local drifter who bragged about knowing what happened, only to be exposed as a liar. And so the years dragged on. Her parents aged, her siblings grew up, but Linda's case stayed frozen in time, like the night she disappeared. For more than a decade, the case sat on shelves, gathering dust. New detectives came in, studied the old notes, retraced her last steps, and found themselves staring at the same dead ends. Some retired, haunted by the case they never solved. Others moved on, convinced they never would. Every November, a vigil was held at the police station. A candle was lit in her memory. Officers stood in silence. Her family prayed for answers. In 1983, 6 years after her disappearance, the case briefly resurfaced in the newspapers when another young woman went missing in a nearby town. People wondered if there was a connection. But the second woman was later found alive, her case unrelated. For Linda's family, hope was a heavy burden. Every time the phone rang, they wondered if it would finally be the call. Every time a body was found elsewhere in the state, they held their breath, waiting to hear if it was her. But for 13 long years, the only constant was silence. Linda Carter remained missing. Her car remained a symbol of the unsolved mystery, and her community lived under a shadow that never quite lifted. August 1990. It was an ordinary summer afternoon when a hiker wandered into a wooded area, less than 5 miles from where Linda's cruiser had been found. The hiker noticed something unusual. The ground was uneven, as if it had once been disturbed. Curiosity led him closer. He saw fragments in the soil, small, pale pieces that looked out of place. When he bent down, he realized what they were. Bone. Police were called immediately. The woods transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape went up. Evidence markers dotted the earth. Forensic teams carefully dug into the soil, uncovering a shallow grave. Inside were human remains, tattered clothing, and most haunting of all, an old police badge, still pinned to a decayed uniform. After 13 years, Linda Carter had been found. The news shattered the quiet town once again. Some wept in sorrow, others in relief. The mystery was no longer about where she was. It was about what had happened to her, and who had put her in that grave. The shallow grave gave investigators more than closure. It gave them clues. Forensic experts studied the bones. They noted fractures consistent with blunt force trauma. The uniform showed tearing around the arms, suggesting a struggle. Most important of all, traces of rope were found near the remains. This wasn't a disappearance. It was a murder. Attention quickly turned back to the old case files. Who had a motive? Who had a grudge against Linda Carter? The answer lay in a man she had arrested just months before her disappearance. His name was Robert Hayes, a local in his 30s with a reputation for violence. He'd been charged with assault after a bar fight, and Linda had been the arresting officer. At the time, Hayes had been considered a person of interest, but with no evidence tying him to the missing officer, he was released. He moved on with his life, working odd jobs, keeping mostly out of trouble. But he never left town. Now, with Linda's body recovered, investigators revisited Hayes. When questioned, Hayes denied involvement. But inconsistencies in his story raised suspicions. Neighbors recalled that he had disappeared for hours on the very night Linda vanished. Old acquaintances remembered him boasting, years later, that he knew what really happened to that lady cop. The evidence mounted. A witness came forward, recalling Hayes near the wooded area in the days after Linda's disappearance. Another tip suggested Hayes had made a disturbing confession while drinking, boasting that he had taken care of the cop who humiliated him. Finally, confronted with the new forensic findings, Hayes cracked. In a chilling confession, he admitted to luring Linda with a false emergency call. He knew she would respond alone, vulnerable. When she arrived, he ambushed her, forced her into the woods, and ended her life in an act of twisted revenge. For 13 years, Hayes had lived freely while Linda's family suffered in silence. Now, justice was finally within reach. The trial of Robert Hayes became the most closely watched case in the region. In the courtroom, Linda's family sat in the front row, clutching photographs of the young officer who had once dreamed of a long career. Reporters filled the benches, their notebooks ready to capture every word. The prosecution laid out the story in painstaking detail. They described Linda's final moments on patrol, the discovery of her car, the fruitless years of searching, and finally, the grave in the woods. Forensic experts testified about the remains. Pathologists explained how the injuries matched an assault. Investigators recounted Hayes's lies, his boasting, his eventual confession. The defense tried to paint a different picture. They argued Hayes had been coerced into confessing, that there was no direct physical evidence tying him to the murder. But the jury wasn't swayed. The timeline, the motive, the confession, it all pointed in one direction. In closing arguments, the prosecutor addressed the jury with words that would be remembered for years. Linda Carter wore the badge of her community with honor. She was targeted, hunted, and silenced by a man who could not accept the consequences of his actions. 13 years may have passed, but justice has no expiration date. After days of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of murder in the first degree. Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As the judge read the sentence, Linda's mother wept openly. Officers in the gallery bowed their heads. Justice had finally been served, but at a cost that could never be repaid. The conviction of Robert Hayes closed a chapter, but it didn't erase the scars. For Linda's family, the trial was both relief and heartbreak. Relief that the man responsible would never harm another soul. Heartbreak that their daughter, sister, and friend had lost 13 years in an unmarked grave. The community struggled with its own emotions. For years, rumors had swirled. Some blamed the police. Others blamed outsiders. Now they knew the truth, that one of their own neighbors had committed the crime. The police department made changes in the aftermath. Officers no longer patrolled alone at night. Dispatch protocols were updated to verify calls before sending officers into isolated areas. Linda's case had forced the department, and many others across the state, to rethink officer safety. But perhaps Linda's greatest legacy was the resilience of her memory. Every year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, candles were lit in her honor. Her badge was retired and placed in a glass case at the station. A scholarship was created in her name for young women entering law enforcement. Her story also became a cautionary tale, studied in police academies across the country. Recruits learned about the risks of complacency, the dangers of routine patrols, and the importance of backup. Linda's sacrifice became part of the training that saved countless lives. For the people who loved her, though, she was never just a lesson. She was Linda, the girl who laughed too loudly at family dinners, who believed in fairness, who wanted to make her town a safer place. In the end, justice did come. But as her brother once said at a memorial service, justice doesn't bring her back. Justice doesn't fill the empty chair at the table. Justice doesn't erase the silence in our lives. But justice matters. Linda Carter's story is a reminder of the fragility of safety, the persistence of truth, and the unshakable bond of community. She may have been silenced that November night, but through the voices of those who remember her, Linda's story still speaks. November 13th, 1977, was the night Officer Linda Carter vanished. 13 years passed before her family knew the truth. 13 years of uncertainty, grief, and unanswered questions. But in the end, the truth emerged. The man responsible was unmasked. Justice, though delayed, was finally served. Linda Carter's story reminds us that time does not erase the past. It waits patiently until the right eyes look in the right places. And when the truth is finally uncovered, it changes everything. This was the story of Officer Linda Carter, the officer who vanished on patrol, and the community that never stopped searching.